The first sound I heard, after 23 years of silence, was my son, David, calling me a worthless burden to his wife, Jennifer. 2 hours later, I walked into their kitchen with a smile on my face, pretending I hadn't heard a single word. That was the moment I realized my family had no idea what was about to happen. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Let me take you back and explain how I ended up here. 3 weeks earlier, Dr. Martinez at St. Mary's Hospital performed what he described as a miracle surgery on my severely damaged ear canals. 23 years before that, a drunk driver had slammed into my car, leaving me completely deaf and killing my husband, Robert. I learned sign language, lived quietly, and raised David as best I could on my own. The surgery was extremely expensive, and carried only a 30% chance of success. David had been furious when I insisted on using my life savings for it. "Mom, you're 68 years old. Why would you put yourself through something this risky?" he argued, but something deep inside me refused to give up hope. The morning I woke up in the recovery room, I heard a nurse's footsteps echoing down the hallway. Then I heard her voice clear as crystal say, "Good morning, Mrs. Sinclair. How are you feeling?" I cried for a full hour, not from pain, but from overwhelming joy. Sound had returned to my world. Dr. Martinez was astonished. "Your hearing is actually better than the normal range, Eleanor," he told me. "It's like your brain compensated for all those lost years." He warned me that I'd need time to adjust, that sounds might feel overwhelming at first. He wasn't wrong. Everything felt amplified: the beeping machines, the murmured conversations in the hallway. That's when I made a decision that changed everything. Instead of telling my family right away, I decided to surprise them. I imagined the looks on their faces when I finally responded to their voices. After more than 2 decades, I pictured David's shock, Jennifer's tears of happiness, and my grandchildren Michael and Sarah finally having real conversations with their grandmother. I spent an entire week in recovery practicing my poker face with the nurses. Not a word to anyone. I told them, "This is going to be the most wonderful surprise." They thought it was sweet to grandmother planning such a heartfelt reveal. The day before I was discharged, David came to visit. He sat beside my bed, moving his lips in the exaggerated way he'd developed over the years, assuming I was reading them. "Mom, Jennifer's prepared the guest room. You'll stay with us while you recover." His voice sounded strained, exhausted. I nodded and smiled, giving him my usual thumbs up. What I didn't realize then was that I was about to find out who my family really was when they believed I couldn't hear them. And the truth, I can tell you now, was far more devastating than the 23 years of silence I had already endured. I arrived at David and Jennifer's house on Maple Street carrying the small overnight bag I'd packed at the hospital. Their 2-story colonial looked exactly the same as it had for the past 15 years. A manicured lawn, a white picket fence, and an American flag David insisted on flying year-round. I had helped them buy this house when David was just starting his accounting practice. Jennifer opened the door wearing what I now recognized as a forced smile. Her lips moved slowly and deliberately, a habit she'd adopted after my accident. "Welcome home, Eleanor. We're so glad you're feeling better." Her voice sounded pleasant, but there was something underneath it that I'd never noticed before: subtle impatience, as though she were reciting lines she didn't want to say. I gave her my usual grateful nod, and let her lead me inside. The guest room was on the first floor, converted from what had once been David's home office. Jennifer had decorated it with floral wallpaper and lace curtains, her idea of what an elderly woman would find comforting. Honestly, it looked more like a funeral parlor, but I'd never complained. How could I, when I couldn't hear their explanations anyway? "The bathroom is right across the hall," Jennifer said, her mouth moving with exaggerated precision. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." She patted my shoulder and left me alone to unpack. For 23 years, I'd lived a mostly isolated life. David visited twice a month. Jennifer came along about half the time, and my grandchildren, Michael and Sarah, showed up for birthdays and major holidays. They were good kids, but they'd grown up with a grandmother who couldn't join normal conversations. Sign language never came easily to them. I filled my silent years with reading, gardening, and volunteering at the local food bank, where communication was more about sorting and organizing than speaking. It had been a peaceful life, lonely but calm. I had convinced myself that I was grateful for whatever time and attention my family gave me. Now, sitting on the edge of the guest room bed, I could hear everything. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away, the television in the living room playing some afternoon talk show. After decades of silence, it was almost too much to take in. What struck me most, though, was hearing myself, my own breathing, my own heartbeat. For 23 years, I had lived inside a soundless bubble. Now I was part of the world again. I could overhear conversations, catch context and subtext, and finally hear what people really thought when they believed no one was listening. David came home from work at exactly 6:15 p.m., just like he had every day for the past 10 years. I heard his keys slide into the lock, his footsteps across the hardwood floor, the dull thud of his briefcase landing on the kitchen counter. "How's the patient?" he asked Jennifer. They were in the kitchen, probably assuming I was resting in the guest room with the door closed. "Fine, I guess," Jennifer replied. Her voice sounded different than it had earlier, less careful, more relaxed. "She seems tired, but that's expected after surgery." "Good. Hopefully this recovery goes quickly. I can't take much more time off work." There it was, the first crack in the mask. David wasn't worried about my health. He was worried about how inconvenient my presence was for his schedule. That evening at dinner, I watched my family's faces as they performed what I now understood was an elaborate show just for me. David carved the roast beef with exaggerated movements, making sure every action was visible. Jennifer pointed to each dish as she served it, carefully shaping the words with her mouth. Mashed potatoes, green beans, gravy. Michael, my 20-year-old grandson, was home from college for spring break. He sat across from me, occasionally waving or giving me a thumbs up when he remembered I was there. Sarah, 18 and a high school senior, barely looked up from her phone the entire meal. For 20 years, I had assumed their behavior was simply the result of our communication barrier. I couldn't have been more wrong. "Grandma looks good, doesn't she?" David said to Jennifer, speaking as if I weren't sitting right there. "It's something people often do around deaf individuals, talk about you in your presence, assuming you can't understand." "So the surgery was successful then?" Jennifer asked. "Too early to tell," David replied. "Dr. Martinez said it could take weeks to know if there's any real improvement. But honestly, even if it works a little, she's sick. How much difference could it really make?" I kept my face calm and pleasant, continuing to eat as my heart pounded in my chest. This was my son discussing his mother's potentially life-changing surgery with the same enthusiasm someone might use to talk about a routine dental cleaning. "What did the doctor say about long-term care?" Jennifer asked, slicing her meat with sharp, precise movements. "Same as before. She can probably manage on her own for a while longer. But we need to start thinking about alternatives." "Alternatives?" The word hung in the air like a threat. Michael looked up from his phone. "Are you talking about putting Grandma in a home?" "We're just discussing options," David said carefully. "Your grandmother is getting older, and her needs are becoming more complicated. But she's been taking care of herself just fine," Sarah said, finally joining the conversation. Jennifer exchanged a glance with David. "It's complicated, honey. Deaf elderly people face special challenges. We just want what's best for your grandmother." I continued eating, maintaining the blank, agreeable expression I'd perfected over the years. Inside, my thoughts were racing. They weren't talking with me about my future. They were talking about me like a problem to be solved. After dinner, I helped clear the table, following my usual routine. I washed the dishes while Jennifer packed away leftovers. The kitchen window overlooked the backyard, where David was pushing our old lawn mower, even though the grass barely needed cutting. "He's avoiding coming back inside," Jennifer muttered under her breath as she watched him through the window. I turned toward her, pretending to read her lips. She waved me off and walked away. But I'd heard enough to understand that even Jennifer recognized David's discomfort with having me in their home. That night, lying in the guest room bed beneath scratchy floral sheets, I listened to my family's real conversations through the thin walls. David and Jennifer's bedroom was directly above mine, and sound carried more than they realized. "How long is she staying?" Jennifer asked. Dr. Martinez said a week for observation, maybe 2 if there are complications. 2 weeks, Jennifer said. "David, 2 weeks of tiptoeing around, watching every word, pretending we're happy she's here." "I know," he replied. "But what choice do we have? She's my mother." "Your mother," Jennifer said quietly, "who could have saved everyone a lot of trouble by accepting that this surgery was a waste of money." I pulled the covers up to my chin, feeling colder than the mild April night should have made me feel. This was how my family saw me, not as someone they loved, but as a problem, an obligation, a burden to be managed. And they had no idea, I could hear every single word, that ignorance was about to become their biggest mistake. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Jennifer talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice carried easily through the house, and I quickly realized she was talking about me. "No, Mother, the surgery doesn't change anything," Jennifer said. "Even if her hearing improves, she's still elderly. She still needs supervision. She's still our responsibility." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Jennifer was speaking to her own mother, discussing my future as casually as if I were a piece of furniture they needed to move. "David thinks we should wait and see," she continued, "but honestly, I don't see the point. Brookside Manor has an opening in their assisted living wing. If we act quickly, we could have her settled there by summer." Brookside Manor. I knew the place. A nursing facility on the outskirts of town that smelled of disinfectant and had a reputation for storing elderly residents rather than caring for them. "I know it's expensive," Jennifer went on, "but David's practice is doing well, and she has her own savings. Plus, there's the house. My house, the small ranch-style home I'd lived in for 43 years. The home where I raised David after Robert died. The place where I'd remained independent even after losing my hearing. They were discussing selling my home to pay for my confinement." I dressed quietly and walked into the kitchen, where Jennifer was pouring herself a cup of coffee. She looked startled to see me awake so early. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said, instantly switching back to her slow, exaggerated lip movements. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded and smiled, pointing toward the coffee pot. She poured me a cup, and I sat at the table, pretending to flip through a magazine while she continued her phone call in the living room. "I'll call them this afternoon," I heard her say. "David doesn't need to know the details until everything is arranged. It'll be easier for everyone that way. Easier for everyone except me." David came downstairs dressed for work in his navy suit and striped tie. He kissed Jennifer goodbye and squeezed my shoulder. "Have a good day, Mom. Jennifer will take care of you." After he left, Jennifer slipped into what appeared to be her usual routine of avoiding me. She cleaned the kitchen with sharp, efficient movements, started a load of laundry, and then disappeared into her home office to work. I spent the morning wandering my temporary prison, listening to the sounds of a house I had helped buy, but was clearly no longer welcome in. The walls were thin, and Jennifer's voice traveled easily through the vents as she made phone calls. The first was to Brookside Manor. "I'd like to ask about availability in your assisted living facility," she said. "For my mother, she's 68, recently had surgery, and we feel she needs more supervision than we can provide." The lies flowed effortlessly. I wasn't deteriorating mentally or physically. I didn't need supervision. What I needed was a family who saw me as a person instead of a problem. The second call was to a real estate agent. "We may have a property coming available soon," Jennifer said. "A small ranch home in the Willowbrook neighborhood, very well maintained. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, large backyard. Yes, I believe it would sell quickly. My house, they were planning to sell it before I even knew they wanted me out." The third call was the one that shattered me completely. "David, it's me. I talked to both places this morning. Brookside has an opening, and Margaret thinks the house would sell within a month of listing. We need to move on this before your mother gets too comfortable with the idea of staying independent." There was a pause while David responded. "I know it feels rushed," Jennifer said, "but think about it logically. If the surgery works, she wants to do more, go places, be more demanding. If it doesn't work, she'll be depressed and harder to manage. Either way, it's better to transition her now while she's still adjusting." Another pause. "No, we don't tell her anything until everything is set. You know how stubborn she can be. Remember when she refused to stop driving? This is the same thing. Sometimes you have to make decisions for people who can't see what's best for them." I sat alone in the guest room, my hands shaking as I folded the same towel again and again. They weren't just planning to betray me. They were proud of how clever they thought they were, congratulating themselves on protecting me from what they believed was my inability to make rational decisions. That afternoon, Michael came home from his college classes. I heard him talking to Jennifer in the kitchen. "How's Grandma doing?" he asked. "Fine," Jennifer replied. "She's adjusting to being here." "Are you guys really thinking about putting her in that nursing home?" Jennifer's voice sharpened. "It's assisted living, Michael, not a nursing home. And yes, we're considering it. Your grandmother needs more care than she realizes, but she's been living alone just fine." "That's exactly what worries us," Jennifer said. "She's been isolated, not taking proper care of herself. The surgery was a desperate attempt to avoid facing reality. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of their manipulation. They had twisted my hope of reconnecting with the world into proof that I was incompetent. But they had made one critical mistake. They had given me the ability to hear their true intentions while still believing I was deaf to them, and I was going to use that advantage in ways they would never anticipate. By Thursday, I had heard enough to understand the full scope of their plan. Jennifer had already scheduled a tour of Brookside Manor for the following week, telling them I was struggling with depression and isolation after an unsuccessful surgery. She had also gotten preliminary estimates from 3 real estate agents for my house, all of them eager to list what they described as a prime property in a desirable neighborhood. The most devastating revelation came when I overheard David speaking to his business partner, Marcus, during a phone conference he took in the home office next to my bedroom. "The timing is actually perfect," David said. "If we move fast, we can get Mom settled before she starts asking questions about her finances. She's got nearly $200,000 in savings, plus the equity in the house. That should cover Brookside for at least 8 years, maybe 10, if we invest it wisely." My savings. Money I had built up over 43 years of careful budgeting. Money I had planned to leave to my grandchildren for college. Money I had hoped to use for travel, now that I might finally be able to hear tour guides and talk with other travelers. "What if she objects?" Marcus asked. "She won't have much choice," David replied. "Jennifer's looked into the legal requirements for elderly care decisions. If we can document that she's not capable of managing her affairs on her own, we can get temporary guardianship." "Is she actually incapable?" Marcus asked. David paused. "She will be once she realizes what's happening. The shock of losing her independence will probably cause depression, confusion, maybe even cognitive decline. It happens all the time with elderly people facing major life changes. They weren't just planning to take my money and my home. They were counting on the trauma of their betrayal to justify it. The cruelty of it was calculated, deliberate, and chilling. That evening, Sarah came home from a school dance, and I heard her talking to Jennifer in the kitchen while she made a late-night snack. "Mom, are you really going to put Grandma in that place?" "It's not putting her anywhere," Jennifer said. "It's helping her transition to appropriate care. But she's not sick or anything. She just can't hear. There's more to it than that, honey. Your grandmother has been isolated for decades. She doesn't understand how much the world has changed or how vulnerable she is. The surgery was probably her last attempt to avoid accepting reality." "What reality?" "That she's old," Jennifer said. "That she needs people to make decisions for her because she can't see the bigger picture anymore." I listened as Jennifer poised my granddaughter's mind with lies, teaching her that elderly people were naturally incompetent, and that families who locked their parents away were actually being kind. "Will we still see her?" Sarah asked. "Of course," Jennifer said quickly. "Brookside has visiting hours. We'll see her regularly." But I had already heard Jennifer tell her own mother how exhausting visiting elderly relatives was, and how relieved she felt that Brookside was far enough away that they wouldn't feel guilty if they didn't go very often. By Friday morning, I had made my decision. I was going to give them exactly what they had given me. A nasty surprise they would never see coming. While Jennifer was at her Pilates class and David was at work, I used their computer to research everything I could about their financial situation. Jennifer had left her email open, and that's when I discovered the truth. They had been living far beyond their means for years. David's accounting practice was struggling. They had 3 credit cards maxed out, and they'd been counting on my money to fix their problems long before my surgery ever happened. Jennifer hadn't just come up with this plan overnight. She'd been laying the groundwork for months, maybe even years. She'd researched nursing homes, carefully calculated my assets, and even consulted an elder law attorney about how to handle difficult transitions for aging family members. I also discovered emails between her and interior designers. She'd been discussing renovations to my house once it became available. She had detailed plans to turn my cozy 3-bedroom ranch into what she called a modern showpiece, perfect for entertaining. They weren't just stealing my home, they were preparing to erase every trace of the life I had built there. But Jennifer had made one critical mistake. Her research focused entirely on legal ways to control elderly people. She never considered what might happen if the elderly person uncovered the plan before it was put into motion. That afternoon, while Jennifer was out grocery shopping, I made a series of phone calls from the guest room. I kept my voice low, speaking quietly, but for the first time in 23 years, I was able to have serious, important conversations without relying on intermediaries or written notes. But my first call was to my bank. I'd like to schedule an appointment to review my accounts and make some changes to my beneficiaries, I told them. The second call was to a lawyer, not the elder law attorney Jennifer had been consulting, but a family law specialist with an excellent reputation for protecting elderly clients from financial abuse. The third call was to a private investigator who specialized in documenting elder abuse cases. By Sunday, I had gathered enough evidence to dismantle their entire plan, and enough legal protection to make sure they would never again be able to make decisions about my life without my explicit consent. But I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. I wanted them to dig deeper, to commit more fully to their betrayal, to show me exactly how far they were willing to go. Because when I finally revealed that I could hear every word they'd said, I wanted the consequences to be complete and irreversible. They had taught me that family meant nothing when money was involved. Now I was going to teach them what happens when you underestimate a woman who's had 23 years to develop patience and the element of surprise. Monday morning arrived with Jennifer in full organizational mode. She had scheduled my follow-up appointment with Dr. Martinez for Wednesday. I had overheard her telling the scheduling nurse that she needed to discuss realistic expectations with the doctor regarding my cognitive state after surgery. She was laying the groundwork to convince my doctor that I was confused and depressed, planting the seeds for her claim that I was incompetent. While Jennifer rushed around the house, preparing for what she believed would be a routine medical appointment, I sat quietly in the guest room, making final preparations for what would actually be the beginning of their worst nightmare. My private investigator, Janet Morrison, had already documented Jennifer's internet searches, her emails with Brookside Manor, and her conversations with real estate agents. Even more damaging, Janet had recorded Jennifer's phone calls with her mother, conversations where Jennifer admitted that I was mentally capable, but insisted that sometimes you have to force elderly people to accept help for their own good. My lawyer, Robert Chen, had prepared a comprehensive protection order that would prevent anyone from making decisions about my finances, housing, or medical care without court approval. He had also drafted a detailed complaint outlining the attempted financial exploitation and emotional abuse. But the most important piece was the recording device Janet helped me install in the guest room. For the past 3 days, I had been documenting every conversation David and Jennifer had about their plans, creating an audio record that would destroy any claim that they were acting in my best interests. Tuesday evening, David came home carrying a bottle of wine and wearing an unusually cheerful expression. He'd clearly had a good day at work, probably because he'd been imagining how my money would solve his financial troubles. "How's our patient?" he asked Jennifer, kissing her cheek. "Good," Jennifer replied. "Tomorrow's appointment should give us the information we need to move forward." They stood in the kitchen, speaking in normal voices, convinced I was napping in the guest room. In reality, I was sitting just around the corner in the dining room, pretending to read a magazine while listening to every word. "Did you talk to Marcus about the timeline?" Jennifer asked. "He thinks we should move quickly once we have medical documentation," David said. "If Dr. Martinez confirms the surgery didn't work, we can use that as proof that Mom's judgment is compromised. If it worked only partially, we can argue she's not adjusting well to the change. And if it worked completely?" Jennifer asked. David laughed. He actually laughed. "Then we've got a bigger problem," David said, "because she might start asking questions about why we're suddenly so interested in her living arrangements." "Don't worry," Jennifer replied calmly. "I've been researching what to say to doctors in situations like this. There are ways to express concern that make medical professionals pay attention: depression, isolation, confusion about finances, difficulty adapting to change." "You're brilliant," David said, and I heard them kissing. They were brilliant, I had to admit. They'd crafted a plan that looked loving and concerned on the surface, while underneath it was ruthless and calculated. If I were still deaf, they probably would have succeeded completely. But I wasn't deaf anymore. And the next day, they were going to learn that their brilliant plan had one fatal flaw. That night, I made my final phone call to Robert Chen. I spoke quietly from the guest room while David and Jennifer watched television upstairs. "Everything's in place," I told him. "They're planning to poison the appointment tomorrow. I want you there." "Are you sure you're ready for this, Eleanor?" he asked. "Once we reveal what you know, there's no going back." "There was no going back the moment they chose to betray me," I replied. "These people have been living in my house, eating food I helped pay for, and planning to steal my life savings while pretending to care about my well-being. I'm ready. Wednesday morning, Jennifer drove me to Dr. Martinez's office. Now that I knew the truth, I recognized the barely concealed anticipation in her expression. She was looking forward to this appointment, confident that she was about to take control of my life with medical approval. In the waiting room, she sat beside me, patting my hand and speaking in her exaggerated, lip-reading voice. Don't worry about anything, Eleanor. Dr. Martinez just wants to check your progress. But when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw her real expression, excited, almost gleeful, like a predator ready to spring its trap. When the nurse called my name, Jennifer immediately stood. I'll come with you, she said, to help with communication. Dr. Martinez greeted us warmly in his office. Mrs. Sinclair, how are you feeling? Before I could answer, Jennifer launched into her performance. Doctor, I'm concerned about my mother-in-law's adjustment since the surgery. She seems confused and withdrawn. She's been staying with us, and we've noticed some troubling signs. What kind of signs? Dr. Martinez asked, his expression turning serious. Difficulty making decisions. Poor sleep. Not responding when we try to communicate. I think the surgery may have been overwhelming for someone her age. I sat quietly, watching Jennifer spin her web of lies, knowing that in about 2 minutes she would realize her prey had grown teeth. Dr. Martinez turned to me. Mrs. Sinclair, how would you describe your experience since the surgery? I looked straight at him and spoke clearly, firmly. Dr. Martinez, my hearing is perfect. In fact, it's better than it's been in 23 years. I can hear everything, including the conversations my family has been having about stealing my money and putting me in a nursing home against my will. Jennifer's face drained of color. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, unable to form words. I've been pretending to still be deaf for the past week, I continued, and during that time, I discovered that my son and his wife have been planning to take control of my finances and sell my house to pay for my incarceration at Brookside Manor. That's not, Jennifer stammered. Mr. Chen, I said toward the door. You can come in now. My lawyer entered the office carrying a thick folder of documents. Mrs. Sinclair, Dr. Martinez said slowly, are you telling me your hearing has been completely restored? Test me, I replied. He stepped behind me and whispered, can you hear this? You said, can you hear this? I answered without turning around. Jennifer was trembling now. Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said calmly, was thinking you could commit elder abuse while I was helpless to stop you. I turned to face her fully for the first time in a week and smiled. Surprise, Jennifer, Grandma isn't as helpless as you thought. The look of pure horror on her face was worth every one of those 23 silent years. Now the real fun was about to begin. The silence in Dr. Martinez's office was deafening, if you'll pardon the expression. Jennifer sat frozen in her chair, her carefully applied makeup starting to smear as reality crashed down on her. Eleanor, she whispered, we can explain everything. Oh, I'm sure you can, I said sweetly. You've been very creative this past week, telling Brookside Manor I was depressed and isolated, telling real estate agents my house would be available soon, telling your mother I was a burden you couldn't wait to be rid of. Robert Chen stepped forward, legal pad in hand. Mrs. Sinclair has been recording conversations for the past 5 days. We have documentation of attempted financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and fraud. Jennifer's hands were shaking now. This is a misunderstanding. We were trying to help. I laughed, and it felt incredibly laughing out loud for the first time in decades. You were trying to help yourselves to my bank account. Dr. Martinez looked back and forth between us, clearly struggling to process what he was witnessing. Mrs. Sinclair, your hearing test results were exceptional, he said. There's no medical reason you can't continue living independently. That's exactly what I told my lawyer, I replied as I stood up. Jennifer, you can call David and let him know that his mother isn't just hearing perfectly, she's thinking perfectly clearly too. Clearly enough to have moved my money into a new bank account yesterday. Jennifer's face drained from white to a sickly green. What do you mean? I mean the $200,000 you were counting on to fix your financial problems is now safely protected in an account you will never have access to. My house has been transferred into a revocable trust managed by a reputable company, and I've filed a restraining order preventing either of you from making decisions about my finances or my care. I picked up my purse, feeling more powerful than I had in 23 years. Oh, and Jennifer, you might want to start looking for a new place to live. I'll be moving back into my house this weekend, and I believe you'll find that your lease on the Maple Street property expires at the end of this month. Robert Chen handed Jennifer a thick envelope. Legal notice of all proceedings, he said. You have 72 hours to vacate Mrs. Sinclair's property, and to cease all contact except through legal counsel. As we headed toward the door, I turned back one last time. By the way, I heard every conversation you had with those interior designers about renovating my house. I was especially amused by your plans to turn my late husband's workshop into a wine cellar. The sound of Jennifer's sobs followed us into the hallway, but I felt nothing except satisfaction. David's reaction was even better. When I arrived at the house with Robert Chen and a sheriff's deputy to collect my belongings, David was waiting in the driveway, radiating the kind of fury that comes from watching carefully laid plans collapse. Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing? He shouted as I stepped out of the lawyer's car. Language, David, I said calmly. I'm reclaiming my life from the children who tried to steal it. We were trying to help. Were you helping me when you told Marcus that my supposed confusion and depression would justify a guardianship claim? Or were you helping me when Jennifer researched the fastest way to liquidate my asset? David's face crumpled. He had forgotten that I might have heard those conversations. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward. Sir, I need you to step aside while Mrs. Sinclair retrieves her property. This is insane, David protested, but the edge had drained from his voice. Mom, you can't destroy our family over a misunderstanding. I'm not destroying anything, I said. You destroyed it when you decided I was worth more to you locked away in a nursing home than living freely in my own house. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. Eleanor, please, we can work this out. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I replied, brushing past her into the house. Family doesn't lie about medical conditions to enable financial exploitation. Family doesn't count the days until they can get rid of their inconvenient elderly relatives. I gathered my few belongings while David and Jennifer stood there, powerless. 23 years of silence had taught me patience. But it had also taught me the importance of acting decisively when the moment arrived. As I packed, I could hear them whispering frantically in the kitchen, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage their plan. There wasn't. The moving truck will be here tomorrow for my furniture, I announced as I prepared to leave. I trust you'll have everything ready. Where are you going to live? David asked, and for just a moment, he sounded like the little boy who once asked me to check under his bed for monsters. In my house, David. The house I've lived in for 43 years, the house you were planning to sell without telling me. But you can't live alone. You need help. I smiled at him, making sure it was the coldest smile I could manage. I've been living alone for 23 years, son. The only help I needed was protection from my own family. Robert Chen handed David his own legal envelope, outstanding loan documentation. Your mother has graciously decided not to pursue immediate collection of the $68,000 you've borrowed from her over the past 5 years, provided you cease all contact and make no further attempts to interfere with her life. David stared down at the papers, his face slowly changing as the realization sank in. Without my money to prop them up, their financial problems had just become far worse, maybe unmanageable. Moving back into my own house felt like resurrection. Every familiar corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the mantel seemed to welcome me home with sounds I hadn't realized how deeply I missed. The creak of the kitchen floorboard, the whistle of the tea kettle, the gentle hum of the refrigerator. But the sweetest sound of all was my phone ringing with calls from David and Jennifer, and choosing not to answer. On my third day home, Janet Morrison, my private investigator, stopped by with her final report. It was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. Your son and daughter-in-law are in serious financial trouble, she said, settling into my living room with a cup of coffee. Without your money, they can't keep up with their mortgage. David's accounting practice has been bleeding clients, and Jennifer's spending has left them about $40,000 deep in credit card debt. How unfortunate, I said, and realized I felt no sympathy at all. It gets better, Janet continued. Jennifer called Brookside Manor to cancel your admission. When they asked why, she had to admit that you'd never actually agreed to be admitted. Making false medical claims about elderly relatives is something they take very seriously. I nearly choked on my coffee. They reported her to Adult Protective Services, Janet said. Apparently, this isn't the first time someone's tried to use their facility to warehouse A perfectly competent elderly person against their will. They have protocols for that. The irony was delicious. Jennifer's own research had led her straight to a facility, trained to recognize and report the exact kind of abuse she'd been attempting. There's more, Janet added. Your granddaughter Sarah contacted me. She wants to see you. That evening, Sarah knocked on my front door holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing an expression of complete embarrassment. Grandma, she said softly when I opened the door. I heard what Mom and Dad were planning. I had no idea. Come in, sweetheart, I said, speaking directly to my granddaughter, without interpreters, without exaggerated lip movements, filled me with a joy I can't properly describe. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd once given her cookies and milk during childhood visits, and had our first real conversation of her adult life. I knew something was off, Sarah admitted. Mom kept saying you needed professional care, but you've always seemed fine to me. Independent. I am independent, I told her. I was just temporarily unable to hear my family planning to steal from me. She laughed, then stopped herself. Is it wrong to find this funny? Because what they did was awful, but the way you caught them was kind of brilliant. It's okay to laugh, I said gently. Sometimes revenge is the only reasonable response to betrayal. We talked for 2 hours about her college plans, her boyfriend, her dream of becoming a veterinarian, conversations I'd missed during her teenage years, lost to a communication barrier that no longer existed. When she got ready to leave, Sarah hesitated at the door. Grandma, are you ever going to forgive them? I thought carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I may someday forgive their greed and selfishness, but I'll never trust them again. And I'll never pretend what they did was acceptable. She nodded and hugged me tightly. Can I come visit again? Anytime you want, I said. We have 23 years of grandmother conversations to catch up on. The final act of my revenge came 6 months later, though I hadn't planned it that way. David and Jennifer lost their house to foreclosure. Without my money to fall back on, their debt and David's failing business triggered a financial collapse they couldn't stop. They moved into a small apartment across town while I continued living comfortably in my carefully maintained home. The poetic justice was that Jennifer ended up taking a job at Brookside Manor, the very place where she'd planned to imprison me. Apparently, they needed someone to process admission paperwork, and her extensive research into eldercare made her qualified. I learned this from Margaret, my next-door neighbor, who had become a close friend since my return home. Margaret and I now spend our mornings gardening and our evenings playing bridge with 2 other women from the neighborhood. And for the first time in 23 years, my life is filled with sound, independence, and peace. For the first time in decades, I had a real social life. One Thursday evening, Margaret mentioned that she'd seen Jennifer at the grocery store. She looked exhausted, Margaret said. She kept staring at the prices, like she couldn't believe how expensive everything has gotten. How sad, I replied, though my voice didn't quite match the words. The final revelation came when Michael called me himself, something he'd never done back when he thought I couldn't hear. Grandma, he said, I want you to know, I'm not taking any money from my parents for college. I got a full scholarship to the state university, and I want to make my own way. That's wonderful, Michael, I told him. I'm so proud of you. I'm ashamed of them, he admitted. What they did to you is unforgivable. They're still your parents, I said gently. Don't let my relationship with them completely poison yours. It's not about you, Grandma, he replied. It's about who they showed themselves to be. I don't want to become someone who looks at elderly relatives as financial opportunities. A week later, Michael began visiting me regularly. Unlike his parents, he genuinely wanted to hear my stories, my opinions, my experiences as a woman who had lived through 7 decades of American history. One evening, as we sat on my front porch watching the sun sink below the horizon, Michael asked the question I'd been expecting. Grandma, do you ever regret how things turned out? I thought about David and Jennifer crammed into their small apartment, about my grandchildren choosing integrity over inheritance, about the independence I had reclaimed and the respect I had demanded. Michael, I said at last, for 23 years, I lived in silence. I accepted whatever scraps of attention my family gave me, and felt grateful for any contact at all. I made myself small and undemanding because I thought that was the price of love. I took a sip of my iced tea, enjoying the sound of the ice clinking against the glass. But love doesn't require you to accept abuse. Family doesn't mean allowing people to steal from you while pretending it's for your own good, and growing old doesn't mean giving up your right to make decisions about your own life. The crickets had begun their evening chorus, and I marveled once again at being able to hear them. Your parents taught me something important, even if they never meant to, I continued. They showed me that sometimes the people who claim to love you can be your greatest threat, and they taught me that I'm stronger than I ever realized. I looked at my grandson, a young man who had chosen integrity over easy money, principle over blind loyalty. So no, Michael, I don't regret how things turned out. For the first time in more than 2 decades, I'm exactly where I belong, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. It's been 2 years since I regained my hearing and uncovered my family's betrayal. David and Jennifer have never apologized, though Jennifer did send a Christmas card last year with a note saying she hoped I was happy with my choices. I am. In fact, I'm happier than I've been since Robert died. My house is alive with sound again, friends stopping by, music playing, my own voice reading books aloud, just because I can. I've joined a book club, started piano lessons, something I'd dreamed of for decades, and even begun dating a widower named Frank who lives 3 streets away. Sarah graduated high school with honors and visits me every few weeks when she's home from college. Michael comes by often, and we've built a closeness I never thought I'd have with my grandchildren. Both of them have made it clear they want nothing from David and Jennifer's eventual inheritance. They'd rather build their lives on their own terms. David's accounting practice failed completely. He now works as a bookkeeper for another firm, earning a fraction of what he once did when he was stealing from me. Jennifer is still employed at Brookside Manor, where she's learned firsthand how elderly people are treated when their families decide they're inconvenient. I've been told they blame me for their financial ruin, as if my refusal to fund their lifestyle were somehow unreasonable. They still don't understand that the money was never theirs. Last month, a woman named Patricia came to see me. Her elderly father was facing a similar situation with his own children, and word had gotten around about my case. "How did you find the strength to fight back?" she asked. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Strength isn't something you suddenly find," I told her. "It's something you remember you always had. For 23 years, I believed my deafness made me vulnerable and dependent. But in truth, it made me self-reliant and observant. I learned to read faces, notice subtle cues, and survive using my own judgment. And that, more than anything else, saved me." I poured her another cup of coffee and smiled to myself, once again appreciating the simple pleasure of hearing it brew. When I realized my hearing had returned, I was faced with a choice. I could keep playing the role of the grateful, quiet, elderly woman my family expected me to be, or I could use the skills I'd developed during my years of silence to protect myself from their greed. Patricia nodded, the understanding clear in her eyes. "Your father isn't helpless," I continued. "He's experienced, he's lived through decades of life, made countless decisions, and overcome challenges you can't even imagine. Don't let anyone convince him that getting older means becoming incapable." 6 months later, Patricia sent me a card. Her father had successfully fought off his children's attempt to take control of his finances and was now living independently in his own home, with the right support services in place. These days, my mornings are spent tending my garden, my afternoons are for reading or visiting with friends, and my evenings are filled with a symphony of sounds most people never stop to appreciate: wind chimes on the porch, birds singing in the backyard, the distant laughter of children playing nearby. But the most satisfying sound of all is silence, the absence of David and Jennifer's voices plotting my destruction. They gave me back my hearing, though they never intended to. In trying to silence me forever, they taught me the value of my own voice. And now that I can hear again, I will never allow anyone to silence me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's claiming everything you deserve and nothing you don't. I'm 70 years old. I own my home. I have money in the bank. I'm surrounded by people who genuinely care about me, and I haven't written a single check to support my ungrateful son in over 2 years. Life is good when you can hear it clearly. Thank you for listening. And don't forget, your voice matters too.